この町じゃさ、いつ死んだっておかしくないんだよ。イグラに参加してようとしてなかろうとさ。だったら楽しんだ方がいいじゃん。
His words carried enough weight to make Keisuke fall silent. For a moment, it seemed that the boy's big eyes were no longer smiling, but the expression vanished as quickly as it came, morphing into a grin so quickly that Akira doubted what he'd seen.
とりあえず説明だけでも受けてみたら？アルビトロンとこ行ってさ。って、そっちの兄さんから詳しいことは聞いてるかな？
Arbitro. That man, Gwen, had mentioned this name during his explanation. Arbitro was the man who ran Igura. In order to challenge Ilray, Akira would have to bring the tags he'd gathered to Arbitro, but he didn't know where to find the man or, for the matter, where the fight with Ilray will take place.
行くだけ行ってみろよ。
Keisuke froze with a look of disbelief in his eyes.
アキラまで。
そうそう、男なら度胸！行くだけ行っとけ！
Keisuke shot Akira a brief, resentful glare, then let his shoulders drop. He looked so crestfallen that Akira felt sorry for him.
じゃあ決定かな？いい？行っちゃうよ！
The boy, who had started off down the street, suddenly turned around.
そういやさ、俺、リンって言うんだけど、兄さんたちは？
Was it safe to reveal their names? Akira considered this for a moment. Ultimately, he had a feeling that it was pointless to worry about the boy. Rin's motives, he would never be able to tell whether Rin's friendliness was an act, and forcing himself to remain alert in such a disarming presence would only wear him out.
アキラだ。こっちはケイスケ。
アキラとケイスケね。
Rin resumed walking with a spring in his step. As they followed behind, a pale Keisuke drew closer to Akira, whispering.
おい、アキラ。どういうつもりだよ。俺は参加するなんて一言も言ってないぞ。
成り行きだろ。登録必須ってわけでもないだろうし、説明だけ聞いて帰ってくればいい。
もし登録必須だったらどうするんだよ。
トイレにでも駆け込んでそのまま逃げてこいよ。
お前
何よ、何話してんの？
Rin stopped and looked back with a puzzled expression.
いや、なんでもない。
Keisuke shook his head and forced a friendly smile.
そうそう。さっきの通行料の話、嘘だから。
嘘？
そう。
Rin nodded like it was nothing. What had he hoped to gain from such a lie? Or had it been nothing more than a whim? There was really no way to tell. Akira shook his head and followed after Rin, blatantly ignoring the reproachful looks that Keisuke kept sending his way. They continued deeper into the red light district, turning once down another road before proceeding straight. According to Rin, this was a shortcut to their destination, which was apparently known as the Palace. Rin wound his way through the dark alleys without slowing down. Perhaps the pace was due in part to the short distance involved, but watching him, Akira began to think that maybe it was safer, in general, to move about briskly, rather than slowly and carefully, as they had before. They reached the main road without any trouble. There, Rin spun around and held out a hand, grinning.
正面に見えるのが悪の組織ビスキオノス、通称白でございます。
Ah, Akira thought, of course. A structure from another age stood there, dignified even in its dinginess. Stairs swept ostentatiously towards the front entrance, huge black doors emptied with glass stood ready to welcome visitors. Even the windows were covered by the velvet curtains. In the courtyard, there was a lit circular fountain with a statue of a nude, wistful boy gazing heavenward at its center, possibly an homage to the work of some famous sculptor. Guards stood in orderly lines on both sides of the stairs, wearing heavy body armor and carrying guns. He could see why they called it the Palace.
でかいな。
確かね、対戦前は多目的なイベントホールとして使われてたんじゃなかったかな、ここ。演劇とかコンサートとか展覧会とか、そういうやつの。で、対戦後、幅を利かせたビスキオ一味が占拠しちゃったってわけ。中はね、もうカオスよ、カオス。
カオス？
行けばわかるって。
Rin made a face and shrugged his shoulders, then continued toward the palace. Akira and Keisuke followed. They passed by the fountain and climbed the stairs leading up to the entrance.
お勤めご苦労様です。
Rin gave the guards at the entrance a friendly wave.
何の用だ？
イグラ参加希望です。
The guard glanced hard from Akira to Keisuke, then eyed Rin's dog tag.
お前はすでに参加しているようだが。
俺じゃないって、後ろ後ろ。青いつなぎ着てるおおらかそうな兄ちゃん。
Keisuke shrank in on himself.
いいだろう。どれ。玄関ホールで待つように。
はいはい。
As the door swung solemnly open, a surreal vista unfolded before them. The hall they stepped into was wide and open, with a vaulted ceiling and a floor of pink marble. Just inside the entrance was a small fountain, bubbling with cool, clear water. The decor was far more luxurious than it had appeared from outside. An enormous chandelier hung overhead, emitting dazzling light. The space was littered with suits of medieval armor and other ostentatious works of art. Of particular note were the statues of young boys, as these were especially common. Perhaps they were all part of the same collection. Not a single statue in the room was female. Kazuke, who appeared to be experiencing sensory overload, kept gaping at the second floor.
はぁ、何度来てもほんと趣味悪いよここ。どういう改造してんだよ、あの変態はさ。
Rin let out a heavy sigh, like he couldn't decide whether to be disgusted or impressed. After some time, a black-suited man shaped like a boulder emerged from the back.
イグラ参加希望の者は
Kazuke went stiff, his eyes cast downward. Rin shot him a glance.
俺です。
Once Kazuke timidly raised his hand, the man passed him a white object.
まずこれをつけるように
The man had given him a pure white mask, which was shaped so as to cover the upper half of his face.
仮面ってこんなのつけるのかよ。
Kazuke frowned as he looked at the mask, his expression saying that he'd really rather not.
他にも参加希望のやついるからね。いきなり顔分かっちゃうのも微妙じゃん。まあ、変っちゃ変だよね。
他の二人は
もう参加してるんで、付き添いでーす。
As Rin gave his tag a shake, Akira pulled his own out from where it had been hiding beneath his jacket.
いいだろう、ついてこい。
Confirming that Kazuke had put the mask on, the guard set off down the corridor that led to the back, past a spiral staircase.
あ
何
Rin gaped at the masked Kazuke. Akira too found his eyes nailed into place.
いや、分かってるとはいえ、やっぱ変だよね。まあ、アルビトラ様の趣味だし、仕方ないんだけどさ。
Kazuki gave Akira a searching sideways glance. Akira didn't let it show on his face, but considering the palace, decor and all, he was starting to wonder what kind of person this Arbitro really was. At the very end of the hallway stood a pair of black double doors, chains wrapped 2 to 3 layers deep around its handles. The guard brought them to the room just before. From what he could see through the door, it looked like a waiting room, with a table, 2 sofas in the middle. It wasn't especially spacious. But 5 or 6 men were waiting inside. All were wearing masks like Kazuke's, and all of them seemed nervous. As Kazuke entered, they turned to stare at him with silent trepidation. Although their faces were hidden, it was obvious from their physics and the way they carried themselves that they were no strangers to violence.
付き添いは外で待て。
The door gradually began to close.
ちょっと
頑張ってねー。
In response to Kazuke's desperate look, Rin waved him a cheerful farewell. Akira merely nodded. The door shut, and after a momentary silence, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed off the marble floor.
待ってました。
Together with Rin's mocking whisper, a man appeared from the far end of the corridor. The moment he saw him, Akira was dumbstruck. The man, who was accompanied by several guards, was the king of bad taste. He was wearing a white suit with white gloves. His shirt was crimson, his necktie was yellow-green, and atop it all, he had swathed himself in a piece of vibrant purple fur. Beneath his bleached and frazzled hair, he wore a mask reminiscent of yet far more gaudy than the one Keisuke had received. As a whole, his outfit evinced an aesthetic sensibility utterly beyond human comprehension. It certainly explained a thing or two about the decor in this place. His henchmen were dressed in similar garb, which clashed sharply with the matte black machine guns hanging from their shoulders. Was this man really the host of Igura? From beneath the mask, two snake-like eyes peered out at Rin and Akira. He seemed to be checking them for text, but Akira sensed the man's eye lingering on his body longer than necessary. He shivered in revulsion.
参加希望者の付き添いですか。ご苦労様です。すぐに終わりますので、しばしお待ちを。あなた方も健闘を祈りますよ。
His voice was as syrupy as his gaze, leaving behind a superficially polite smile. The man vanished inside the waiting room together with his underlings. So, that really was Arbitro.
キモいよね、あいつ。蛇みたいな目でチロチロ見やがってさ、変態そのものって感じ。
そうだな。
ね、アキラもそう思ったっしょ？イルレがいなきゃ何もできないくせにさ、まるでビスキュオは自分のものって感じ。
Encouraged by Akira's agreement, Rin let out a contemptuous snort. What was taking place inside the waiting room? Recording their citizen numbers, explaining the rules of the tournament. It probably stopped there, but the fact that Arbitro was so bizarre gave Akira some cause for worry. He decided to ask Rin for more information. This will also help to kill time.
あいつ、大丈夫なのか？
へ？何が？
何か妙なことしたりとか。
ああ、見るからに変態っぽいもんね。変態を突っ走るって感じだもんね。でもさすがに参加希望者に手を出すことはないと思うよ。あいつも一応仕事とプライベートの分別くらいはつくみたいだし。
At this point, Rin frowned.
まあ、どうだかわかんないけどね。奴隷とか好きらしいし。
奴隷？
A disquieting word.
そうそう、タグの交換でさ。って参加したばっかだからわかんないか。アルビトロもそこはっきり説明しないしね。余ったタグをアルビトロのとこに持ってくとさ、景品と交換してくれんのよ。1枚から金。でさ、景品って麻薬、酒、金、いろいろあってね。まあ強いタグに応じて変わるんだけど、その中にさ、あるんだよね。
At this last part, Rin lowered his voice into a theatrical whisper.
何が？
だから、奴隷だよ。敗者は処刑人に見つかると始末されちゃうけどさ、顔がアルビトロ好みだと殺さずに回収されちゃうことがあって、奴隷に仕立て上げられて景品として出されちゃうわけ。で、その調教をさ、奴がやってるって噂。
Executioners. Though the name didn't leave much to the imagination, Akira wondered what their duties were in actuality. He contemplated asking, but if it were common knowledge for Igura participants, The question might make Rin suspicious. He let it pass without comment.
悪趣味だな。
ほんと、死んだ方がまだマシと。
Just then, the door opened, and Arbitro came out. Rin immediately fell silent.
ごきげんよ
After giving them a lavish smile, Arbitro disappeared down the hallway with his men. The newly inducted fighters, tags hanging down over their chests, began to exit the room. Their eyes were proud and eager beneath their masks. For some reason, though, they left the room one at a time, with a long pause after each. Confused by this, he was about to enter the room when Rin stopped him.
忘れちゃった。10分間隔で一人ずつ部屋から退出するの。乱闘防止のさ。こんなとこで戦ったらすぐに警備員に撃ち殺されて終わりだけどね。昔、そういうことがあったみたい。
はあ、忘れてた。
Inwardly flustered, Akira drew back and waited for Keisuke to emerge. He ended up waiting for almost half an hour. Finally, Keisuke, the last to leave, shouted out with drooping shoulders.
おっかえりー。
Rin peered up at his face with a teasing smile.
タグは結局登録はどうしたのさ。
やめておいた。
Keisuke mumbled, dropped his eyes to the floor.
でもやっぱりね。そんなへっぴり腰じゃ無理だと思ってたのよ、俺。
Rin smacked Keisuke on the small of his back.
叩くことないだろ。
アルビトロはなんて言ってた？
気が向いたらまたいつでもどうぞ。歓迎ですってさ。
Keisuke spoke with a rueful smile, as if remembering how Arbitro had looked.
あいつのキモい動きが目に浮かぶ。
まあ、無事に戻ってこられてよかったな。
なんだよそれ。どういう意味だよ。
奴隷趣味があるらしい。
奴隷？
Keisuke frowned like he couldn't believe his ears.
奴隷ってなんだよ一体。
奴隷は奴隷。終わったんならとっとと行くよ。ここいるとなんか痒くなってくる。
Rin grimaced theatrically, scratching himself on the throat, and walked off swiftly toward the entrance.
おいったく本当に勝手だな。
As they followed after Rin, Keisuke turned to look at Akira.
アキラ。ごめん。
なんで謝るんだよ。
いや、だって。
Though he wouldn't say it, Akira was glad that Keisuke had decided not to participate. Keisuke could barely hold his own in a fistfight. There was no way he'd be able to handle this. Keisuke gave Akira a long, droopy-eyed look, then lowered his gaze. After returning Keisuke's mask to the guards and exiting the building, they descended the stairs to the street. Rin twirled around to face them.
ねえねえ、さ、俺ちょっとこれから知り合いに会いに行くんだけど、一緒に行く？
知り合い？
うん。ちょっと頼まれてたものがあってね。いろいろ詳しいおっさんなんだけどさ、紹介してあげるよ。 知り合っといて損はないと思うよ。
Akira's first thought was to suspect an ulterior motive. He still didn't understand why Rin was so friendly. When Akira didn't respond, large eyes gazed up at him from below.
何か企んでるとか考えてるだろう。俺はさ、結構長いことイグラやってるから退屈してきちゃったわけ。飽き気味なのよ。
飽き気味？殺し合いのゲームでか。
そうだよ。だって俺強いもん。
Kazuki seemed taken aback by Rin's nonchalant assertion.
タグ欲しければその辺の雑魚やっちゃえばいいんだしさ。わざわざカリカリすることなし。アキラたちにだってそんな話じゃないっしょ。
それはまあそうだけど。
んじゃあ行こうよ。
Kazuki gave Akira a beseeching look. He clearly wasn't satisfied with Rin's explanation. Neither was Akira, for that matter. But now that they had set foot in Toshima, that would remain a constant threat no matter how much they tried to avoid it. That being the case, it couldn't hurt to make use of Rin's contacts. See what they could learn. If Rin did anything too shady, they could always leave. Having reached this conclusion, Akira nodded.
行こ
アキラ。
Ignoring Kazuki's troubled expression, he followed Rin back into the labyrinth of alleyways. Once they were sure that no one else was around, Rin ran off to find a phone. Apparently, the person they were looking for was hard to pin down, so Rin wanted to make sure of his current location. After the war had rendered mobile phones virtually useless, landlines had once again returned to the limelight. Still, working ones were hard to come by. The communicator Emma had given him was wireless, like a cell phone, but was supposedly much more reliable. It could even pick up radio waves, he'd been told. It was shortly before sunset and the sky was swept with orange and blue. Akira and Kazuki lean against opposite walls as they await Rin's return.
う。どうだった？
ん？
参加登録。
ああ。
Kazuki's expression darkened slightly.
とりあえず簡単なルール説明があって、適当な質疑応答があって、あの変な仮面のアルビトロだっけ？あいつが妙に大げさだったくらいかな。
Akira could easily imagine Arbitro's theatrics.
聞いてきたことを話そうか。
ああ。
Gwen's explanation had been a little too concise. His face still dark. Kazuki looked down for a while before finally speaking.
まず、このタグゲームはポーカー形式になっている。これは知ってるだろ？
ああ。
ある5種類の組み合わせでタグを揃えると、イルレへの挑戦権を獲得できる。これは？
知ってる。
それじゃあ処刑人のことは？
Akira shook his head.
詳しくは知らない。
そっか。まあなんだろう。ルール違反者の死刑執行人ってやつかな。不定期にトシマを周回してるらしくて、イグラのルールから違反してるやつを見つけたら即始末する。つまり殺すってことらしい。違反ってのは重火器の所持、目撃者のいないバトル、闇討ちとか卑怯な手段を使うとか、あとはイグラを危険することとか。
違反者は問答無用で死刑か。
そう。それと、タグの取り合いをした時の勝敗だけど、背中が地面にべったりついたら負けだって。で、勝ったやつは、当然負けたやつのタグを奪う。それ以外に。
Keisuke stopped speaking and dropped his gaze to his feet. The gloom in his face grew thicker.
それ以外に？なんだよ。
それ以外に、負けたやつを好きにすることができるって。
Keisuke kept his gaze lowered, as if the words were hard for him to say. Akira could imagine why. It made perfect sense.
なんて言うんだろう。好きにすることができるってのは、つまり、無理やり何か起こることもあるってことらしい。
無理やり？
だから、
Keisuke shouted, his face suddenly red as a beet. Seeing this, Akira realized what he meant.
ほら、ここって女の数が極端に少ないからさ、刑務所みたいな状態だし、ただ、それはアルビトロが冗談っぽく言ってたから、本当かどうかはわからないけど。
Akira knew that it wasn't a joke. The memory of what he'd seen the night before was still fresh in his mind. So, those two had been fighters, and the victor had chosen to degrade his vanquished opponent even after he was dead. Akira could understand giving winners power over losers. But what twisted lust for conquest would drive someone to defile an empty shell?
理解できないな。
ああ、でも、そういうのも負けたやつを貶める手段としては有効なんだってさ。まあ、でも、確かにそうだよな。だって、好きでもないやつになんて。
好き嫌いの問題なのか。
Keisuke's voice cracked, his eyes going wide. His face was even redder than before, and not because of the setting sun.
違うよ、勘違いするなよ。そうじゃなくて。
勘違い？
いや。
Keisuke trailed off. After a moment or two of awkward silence, he cleared his throat and changed the topic.
あとは、5枚以上で不要になったタグは、アルビトロのところに持っていくと、商品と交換してもらえるらしい。まあ、そんなところかな。
When he finished speaking, Keisuke sighed loudly as though his work were finally done. It was a very unbalanced game, Akira thought. There was too wide a gap between the core rules and the ones that seemed tacked on. The fact that it worked regardless must be thanks entirely to Ilrei's authority.
アキラ。
When he looked up, he found Keisuke looking at him with a question in his eyes.
なんだよ。
あのさ、ここまで来たら、今さら、もう無理だって分かってる。分かってるんだけど、やっぱりさ、俺、アキラに参加してほしくないんだ。ルール聞いて、どれだけ危険なゲームなのかってことも、よく分かったし。
Keisuke balled his hands into fists. The fading light outlined him in gold.
でも、やめられないってことも分かってる。もう参加しちゃってるし、危険はイグラのルール違反だ。それに、何より命かかってるしさ。それで、俺、いても立ってもいられなくて、 ついここまでついてきちゃったけど、その
Keisuke muttered something indistinct, then lapsed into silence for some time before slowly lifting his face. Eyes hard with resolve, stared directly into Akira's.
俺さ、イグラに